Welcome back to Dissect the Question. A researcher is using alpha-bungarotoxin to bind to and therefore mark synapses in the brain that are inhibited by the nicotine in tobacco products. The researcher accidentally self-administers this toxin through a syringe and needle intended for a rubber-top test tube into his skin. What's the most likely effect of alpha-bungarotoxin on the researcher's motor system? Well, let's look at the clinical vignette, and it seems that the clinical vignette is telling us that nicotine is what the alpha-bungarotoxin is doing. It's doing something to nicotinic receptors, or receptors for nicotine. What does it do? Well, alpha-bungarotoxin is a toxin from snakes that inhibits or blocks nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. What's the effect of alpha-bungarotoxin on the motor system? Well, here we have a motor neuron releasing acetylcholine onto a skeletal muscle, and that skeletal muscle is going to have acetylcholine receptors, right? So if we block the acetylcholine receptors, acetylcholine can't act and we won't get an action potential. It seems like this is kind of an easy question, but the only appropriate answer is paralysis. How did we get to it? We looked at nicotine, and nicotine works on nicotinic receptors. We know skeletal muscle has nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, and the only thing left out was that the alpha-bungarotoxin, we have to know, blocks nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. That's why it can be used to mark synapses in the brain that are inhibited by the nicotine in tobacco products. You know, with multiple choice questions, we can't just leave it at that. We have to look at it. Are there any other answers? Because sometimes there's two answers and we have to pick the best one. So, contracture. What's contracture? Contracture is a state of contraction without relaxation, similar to spasm. Contracture and spasm are so close that we would need really there'd be two answers if that was correct. Now, when we block the acetylcholine receptors, we don't get contracture. In fact, we get just the opposite. We get a flaccid paralysis, a contracture, a rigor, a spasm, or tetany are all high excitability states, where paralysis is a low excitability state, especially if it's at a lower motor neuron. So the lower motor neuron blocking produces a flaccid paralysis. Contracture, rigor, spasm, and tetany all relate to what? High excitability, or a state of stiffness of the muscle. Stiff muscles because of increased excitation. Here we have decreased excitation and flaccid paralysis. So it's a no-brainer that paralysis is the best answer.